All right. So, good afternoon, good morning, good evening. I don't have a title for any of this yet, obviously. I don't have a title for this yet, but I'm working on it. I promise. I'm working on it. Either which way, you know what I'm saying? I'll name the segment later. We'll figure it out. We'll figure it out. It is what it is. Let's go ahead, take a seat and whatnot. You know what I'm saying? Like, I'm paying, so, you know what I'm saying, at the very least. There's always that. There's that incentive. And I'd like to talk to you guys, if I could, yet again, about last night. Well, maybe not last night, but yesterday in particular, as it pertains to the first episode of Smart Guys, the Revival, or whatever. And I really just want to talk about the episode itself. It happened pretty much the way I thought it would, to be honest with you. PPP came in prepared, and he led the show. Phil, all he had to do was basically run OBS and call out contributions and whatever, and that was pretty much it. Now, how long can the show go in that format? Not particularly long, to be honest, because it won't take long for PPP to garner the type of attention that he won't need to do it on DSP's platform. He can just do it on one of his own. So there's that. On top of that, as it pertains to some of the benefits, PPP has a lot of upside on all of this. He's going to very much make out like a bandit on this if he plays his cards right. Whereas DSP, as usual, is going to just hang on, try to, get his half of the contributions and hope that the rub that PPP gives him will be able to carry him a few months or whatever. As it pertains to show structure and flow, I think those are the two first things I want to speak on. The structure of the show, at least so far, or at least that one show, I say we would need at least 2 or 3 before I can give you some real headweight on it. It works. Have PPP go over the matches and then give his insight. Go ahead and throw some context behind certain stuff, or even something to compare it to see if he can try to pull DSP into the conversation. And I think keep it like that. Keep the segment short depending on the matches. There's only 4 matches that they had to go over. The next show or next week, we'll see how that pans. And I think PPP gave good context. I think his pacing was good. It was pretty square for the most part. Let's talk about flow. Phil was incredibly disruptive. Oh my god. When he wasn't doing his bobbing head fucking impression and shit, which is terrible. He must have got that from Jenna. Or Officer Sanders. He literally added nothing to the conversation. He basically copy and paste what PPP said to in his own words, if you will, or in his own snorts. He didn't add anything. Like, the more I listen to him, the more I'm almost 100% confident that he's not a wrestling fan. He's someone who only got into it because probably the people around him were actually into it, and because of his attraction to CM Punk and John. That's it. Like, he essentially liked wrestling because the people around him did. He was never a fan. He watched it, but he was never really a fan, which leads me to believe that the only reason why he plays WWE Champions is not because he's an actual wrestling fan or even because he likes the game, because he has some prominence in it, for good or bad, and he's addicted. He has a very addictive personality, so he's actually addicted to the concept of gambling, especially something that requires very little effort on his part. So the way I see it, I mean, it kind of makes sense. And then, now that I think about that, and bringing that up into context, it only reinforces my point that DSP was never a fan of fighting games. He's not even a fan of Street Fighter. He's a fan of Super Turbo, because it's the only thing that he can attach his name to and say, hey, look, I did something. And that's it. Which explains why he got into all those conflicts with all those other communities, the Tekken community, Guilty Gear community, anything that basically wasn't Capcom, and why he didn't understand people didn't come to his aid or to reinforce some of the points he was making, because he's looking at it as, hey, I'm writing for Capcom, and you guys are all, you know, Capcom fans or whatever, so you guys should have my back on this. And that's not how that works. Because most people played more than one game back in those days, or they watched more than one game, so they built a respect for it. Phil didn't. And the reason why Phil didn't is because he wasn't a fan of none of it. He only did it because it served a purpose. It gave him, it insatiated a need, and even fulfilled that need every once in a while, dopamine or whatever. And that's where all of that stems from. Wrestling, I think, is no different. The next thing I want to point out, which I thought was really smart on PPP's part, was as he's putting out this information, as he's giving context to this stuff, not just to what they saw last night, but some of the more behind the scenes stuff, right? The stuff that you get from shoot interviews or whatever the case may be. He didn't come across like someone who, oh, I know everything, I'm Mr. Know-It-All, this, that, and the third. He was trying to teach, well, I think he did for some people anyway. He was teaching people, is what I'm trying to say. He was actually teaching people. He was giving people context to why some of the situations were going on the way they did. For example, when PPP brought up, hey, I don't see Hunter, you know, being in charge for more than a few years, here's why. You know what I'm saying? I thought that was very good context to what the scenario is, to what the scenario is, and what was actually going on amongst the McMahons, especially when he brought up the situation with Shane McMahon, and Vince basically had that had basically said, hey, if you wanted to ever run this company one day, you need to stab me dead in the chest, which is ironic because Vince stabbed his father in the back financially. So he wants to be stabbed in the chest by fucking Shane. It's kind of weird, but I see where Vince was coming from with that, but I can also understand why Shane has so much resistance. One, Shane has always tried to play everything on the straight and narrow. Two, Shane has sons himself. I don't remember if he has 2 sons or if he has 3. And he didn't want to bring them up in that environment. If Shane had conformed and done what Vince wanted him to, then Vince would have groomed, quote unquote, he would have groomed his grandchildren to do the same when it's time to take Shane out. And even though Stephanie and Hunter were willing to do it, I mean, look at what Vince did to them. Because, yet again, Vince always wanted Shane to take over. And I think Shane could have, but then at the same time, I think Vince should have listened to Shane, what was that, 20 years ago, maybe 15 years ago, whatever it was, that they should have invested in and or should have bought UFC, but that's a whole nother talk for another day. But I did appreciate PPP, or Triple P as everybody likes to call him. I appreciate him trying to actually educate people on some of those behind the scene nuances, which leads us to why the product is the way it is, why it's presented the way it is, and why certain people have grievances. I thought he did that fairly well, to be honest with you. Especially since a lot of the references he made, I can point to an article, I can point to a couple of shoot interviews, because there was a few of them that he brought up, especially like the John Leonidas one, the story about how John Leonidas got a job for life and by saving the tapes out of his out of the trunk of a car that was like burning or whatever. There's an actual interesting story about why that car was on fire, but that's a whole nother thing for another day. I thought he brought some interesting context, stuff that DSP is not going to know, he's probably not going to care about, and so it which only allows PPP to continue to be a step above Phil and whatever knowledge he thinks he has. As pertaining to that, let's jump over to Phil for a second. Phil's disruption of the pacing of the show is glaringly obvious in a couple of different ways. One, he tried to wrestle control of the podcast or the show in air quotes. In one way, through donations, by saying, you know, like once he thought PPP had made his particular point on a segment, he tried to come in kind of like how Andy does, and try to basically, you know, kind of curve in at the back end of it to read out donations, not realizing that and not understanding, because it's the first time they're actually collaborating in this capacity or in this format, that PPP will give you subtle hints when you should come in through the break, or in the break, if you will. And Phil didn't pick up on any of them, despite the fact that PPP made it very, very obvious. Very, very obvious. That was very surprising that Phil couldn't pick up on those small nuances, but not that I expected him to. The next thing that was glaring, that's a huge problem, and it will continue to be a huge problem moving forward, is the 5-year excuse. I only needed to hear that once before I was incredibly irritated by it. But and I'm anxious to see how long PPP is willing to deal with it. But every time DSP didn't know anything, every time PPP asked him a question or his opinion on something, that was the first thing he ran to. And the reason why is because, one, he thinks he can use it as a shield. If he doesn't know something, if he doesn't understand anything, that's my reason for not knowing. But then PPP is going to eventually smarten up to it and go back to stuff that happened in the era that DSP was actually watching, allegedly. And eventually Phil's going to falter there too, and he don't even see it. Like, PPP is already setting him up. He's already slowly but surely conditioning him, and DSP don't even see it. Which only shows how lazy DSP is. I mean, it makes you wonder how much of the show that he actually watched. I don't know if he watched that whole event. I really don't. I can't say with any confidence that he may or may not have. On top of the fact that PPP kind of admitted that he sent him clips, material, whatever it was, to prompt him, to prep him for that show anyway. So it goes back to what I've already said, where PPP is really the driving force behind this. He really is. DSP is just another mouthpiece, and he's just someone to run OBS and read out super chats, and that's pretty much the end all be all. Even amongst an opinion, DSP is scared to say anything that would make him come across as stupid, uninformed, or just wrong. And whatever or however DSP thought the wrestling community was back in his day, he's not going to survive in this community now, or in that community, or whatever, however you perceive it, amongst real wrestling fans, or even people who may not watch the product, but they watch or listen to podcasts or other people who are actually in on it. He's not going to survive like this. Not at all. And PPP can only shield him so much. And even then, DSP is not able to pick up on certain nuances or cues. He's going to be hurting. He's going to be hurting real good, to be honest with you. I thought that when PPP threw out stuff about, what'd you think about the Hogan situation? Him promoting the beer, him being booed and ridiculed or whatever. I mean, even then, DSP didn't really give any serious answers. To be honest, as PPP was giving more context to that, saying, hey, he's said some fucking crazy ass, wild ass shit. He's fucked over a shitload of people. It is what it is, but hey, we need to appreciate the people who came before us that allowed this to be what it is. I understand what PPP is coming from, or where PPP is coming from with that, but let's be honest though too, that's like a two-way street, and there's a lot of hypocrisy in wrestling. So the fact that Hogan's getting what he's getting, he knew this was coming about. He's fucked over a lot of people in a lot of different areas of wrestling. Sooner than later, he was going to need those people. Everybody does. And he screwed, I mean, you know what I'm saying? Like, you can only fuck over so many people and the business at large for so long that the business is going to eventually forget you. On top of that, wrestling has always been a transient-like type of business. It don't take long that you could be damn near the man or a main Carter, and then you catch an injury and people are quick to forget. That's just the reality of wrestling as a whole. You're only as good as your last match and your next match. End of story. That if neither one of those things are provided, then who gives a shit about who gives a shit? Speaking of which, I thought and to speak on the hypocrisy, look at the situation they talked about with Undertaker, having Trump on, and then Hogan endorsing him, and then look who remembers that what. So there's that. On top of that, I thought PPP made some pretty good points about CM Punk. Not CM Punk, I'm sorry, about John Cena, and how in the WWE building his ass up, it killed so many young talent, and it discouraged anybody from really wanting to deal with Cena in any type of way, shape, or form. Whether him personally or not is incidental, but pretty much Cena's run, everybody got buried. On top of the fact that, you know, Cena wants to go for the title one more time to beat Flair's record, but him putting the emphasis on, you know, Flair's actually won way more world titles than that, but, you know, yada, yada, yada. And I honestly like the idea of maybe someone like a Logan Paul actually getting put over on Cena's last match. I kind of like that idea. So I thought there was some pretty good insight, at least at that particular point. But I mean, truth be told, it doesn't have to be Logan Paul. It can be just anybody who actually deserves that shot or that opportunity. I think another point that was brought up that was, I don't know if I'd say it was significant, but it speaks to Phil's inability to separate the pacing of the business and matches and consistency as it pertains to performance or whatnot, is when DSP was like, oh, well, the show was pretty much great, the production was great, everything was great this week, but is it going to be like that next week? Is it going to be like that the week after that and the week after that? And this, yet again, tells me that he's not a wrestling fan, because it'll never be like that. No show is ever going to be able to outdo itself consistently like that without causing burnout. That was one of the reasons why I think the Attitude Era did so well for itself, because you had so many people that they could bring in and basically be like, hey, go out there and make it happen as best you can. And then they kind of build around that. This is before the writing room or the writers really became prominent. That I think that it took the pressure off your Undertakers, your Stone Cold Steve Austins, your Rocks, or whatever the case may be, right? It took the pressure off the top guys and let mid and low and the mid carders and the bottom or low carders come in and get off for about a week, maybe two, and then you can bring the other guys back in, the heavy hitters and whatnot, to build the audience back up, build up the anticipation. But see, DSP doesn't understand that, and of course he doesn't understand it, because look at how he fucking runs his own shit. The dude literally will run a game into the ground. If the game does incredibly well first time around, second time around, third time around, instead of giving it a chance to breathe, no, I got to keep milking this until, you know, people don't like it or until I finish the playthrough, whichever comes first. Which, obviously, the former is always going to happen before the latter. And then he has to run off and find out what the next thing is. His mind's, it's just like what I try to tell you guys. The way DSP does anything is the way he does everything. And you can see that on how he perceives the product, or how he believes the product should be presented. Because of that, he's never going to succeed in wrestling, to be honest with you. Not without one or two people holding his hand. He just doesn't understand the philosophy on how the game is played. For example, PPP brought up the concept of, not concept, but the well-known term spot monkey, right? And when he was talking about Seth Rollins. Truth be told, that's exactly what DSP is. That's literally what DSP is. He's someone who's constantly chasing that pop, that reaction. He doesn't understand pacing. He doesn't understand psychology. He doesn't understand ring psychology. He doesn't understand how to build an audience up, bring them back down so he can kind of mitigate the pacing, right? And then have them go back up in certain situations, which probably tells me that he can't get a woman off even if he wanted to. Probably couldn't get a man off either. Oh, that's so pathetic. Anyway, the point being is PPP is gonna have to put a lot of work into this idiot. Holy shit. Holy shit. PPP's work is damn near cut out for him. This is a failed attempt. To be honest. Like, you know what I'm saying? You're not gonna fucking bend a river in one day, obviously. Rome wasn't made overnight. Snortopia, or fucking Goutopia, if you will, was definitely not conceived in one season. But Jesus Christ, man. Phil needs just to get him into the flow of the show, podcast, or whatever. That right there in itself is a problem. And that right there needs to be worked on first. PPP or Triple P needs to establish with Phil what the pacing is. He needs to establish to Phil, hey, I'm going to start the ball off I'm gonna go into this. You tag in. You go ahead and get your rocks off, or whatever the case may be, or go ahead and satisfy your penne. You tag me back in for the finish, and then you know what I'm saying. Let me get the adulations or whatever, and then you go into the next. Then you go into contributions or whatever. It needs to be paced like that. It doesn't need to be. It doesn't need to be crazy extensive. And because DSP don't know shit for shit, his segment has to be far shorter than PPP. PPP sets him up. DSP goes ahead and gives his opinion. PPP knocks him down. Go into donations. Move into next segment. End of story. If they do it that way, if PPP can conform him to that, or Triple P, if he can form him into that shit, conform him, then it could it'll go for a little while. To be honest, if not, if you have the disruption that you heard, you're gonna have a lot of problems, especially from an audio standpoint. Like when you, as you know, there's a big difference between you seeing something and then you hearing something, right? You can interpret something, you can interpret the same thing differently depending on how you perceive it. I believe that in audio form, PPP is gonna shine no matter what, and DSP is gonna falter because there's no confidence. He doesn't exude confidence. You don't hear it when he speaks. In a visual form, Phil's just gonna look out of place and awkward. Like even with the Philomania shirt, it just screams poser. It screams fraud. It screams fake. And that's why him being out of it for 5 years only makes sense. He doesn't have to say it. He looks it. He sounds like it. You know what I mean? When PPP stepped up to the mic, you could hear the confidence that he had. You could hear the how enthusiastic he was. You can hear that he's a fan. Like he's excited to do this. You know what I'm saying? And every time he was building that excitement up, every time he was trying to build the audience or the stream up or whatever, Phil dampened it. And I don't know, and I don't want to give Phil enough credit to say he's doing it on purpose, or if that's just something innately part of DSP's ignorance. Could be both. But the exhaustion that Austin or that Ashton or that Triple P is going to have to spend trying to build up the anticipation with each segment just to have DSP damper that shit is going to be, that's going to be frustrating. That's going to be incredibly frustrating because it's frustrating to hear it. You know what I'm saying? So I can only imagine what it's like to actually deal with it. So that's my situation on that. Like that's my situation on that. That's pretty much, that's just some of my thoughts. I thought that like I said, I thought PPP brought up some great points and whatnot. And yet again, you can go back and look where he found some of these things. Like you can tell he listens to his shoot interviews. He definitely checks out a dirt sheet every once in a while. He brought up a lot of good stuff as it pertains to gossip. That was pretty good. He understands the whole TKO merger. He brought up the thing about, you know, Triple H and Sean did some pretty fucked up shit. They did a lot of fucked up shit, especially to the Rock, to be honest with you. So the irony that Hunter is the man, at least for the time being, but but the Rock is over him. Like the Rock is literally his boss because he's on the board of TKO. I thought that right there puts a lot in the context, and that right there would have been a point for DSP to come in and be like, oh yeah, you know, Sean and Triple H used to shit all over fucking the Rock, and now he's the man. Like, you remember back, I know fucking DSP doesn't know this, but you remember when Bret Hart was willing to put the Rock over in the middle of the ring, 1, 2, 3, clean, and fucking Triple H and Sean walked into Vince's office and be like, no, Bret can't do that. No, that's bullshit. No, fuck all that. No, he's not doing that. You got to tell him he can't do that. You know what I mean? Like, there's little moments like that that really harkens to the actual wrestling fan itself, and to the casual who may be just listening to it. It really kind of feeds into the drama and a lot of the behind the scenes, the politics that goes on, and how jealousy and envy and all that other bullshit can be a thing. And then, you know, DSP, because of his love for John and PPP and obviously Andy, his gaming soulmate, he could have also brought up some of the rumors that allegedly Shawn Michaels may or may not have done allegedly done favors for for Vince back in the day and whatnot. You know what I'm saying? Posing, this, that, and the third. There's all kinds of weird ass rumors out there about that shit. But or at least allegations that were made to him. A lot of that got squashed, but it was a thing that was said for a while. These are the things that DSP is going to need to contribute. He's going to need to contribute to this if he wants to pull his weight. You're someone who's known for being a negative piece of shit. And despite your claims of you're not about drama, you hate drama and all that silly shit, I mean, the wrestling business is full of it. You know what I mean? It's full of fucking drama. And DSP should be focusing on that. He should be focusing on that drama aspect, the locker room bullshit, the stuff that's said in shoot interviews. He should be using a lot of that information that's out there to his advantage to help complement what PPP is bringing to the table. And I don't think DSP is able to do it because he's too lazy. He's too lazy. He's too stupid. He doesn't know what to look for. He doesn't really know how to look for it. And even if he could, he wouldn't know how to incorporate it. And I would say, as it being for the third, not knowing how to incorporate it, I don't think that's you may or may not be able to blame him for that, because I'm sure a lot of people feel like that, or a lot of people might have that issue. But you can tell also that PPP is basically, or Triple P, keeps that shit wide fucking open. Like this, he gave DSP a bunch of openings to come in and try to make a point. You know what I'm saying? To get that hot tag, if you will, and be able to, you know what I'm saying, and be able to take control of the scenario for a bit before tagging back. But DSP is not capable of doing it. And yet again, you can see a lot of DSP's insecurities sitting next to PPP. You know what I'm saying? Where Andy's just kind of loose and just goofy as fuck, but you see that he don't ever feel intimidated by PPP. Then again, it's the same guy that had him pinned down, face down, ass up on the kitchen floor, humping him. So that I guess that right there probably speaks some shit. But DSP's not brave enough to try to compete. He's just willing to be a submissive bitch. You know what I'm saying? Whereas Andy was trying to fight back a little bit, DSP is just going to sit there and take it. And after a while, if DSP doesn't start kind of reacting to the banter with banter of his own, if he doesn't start actually pushing back, it's his failure is going to be all but assured. And you can't blame a detractor, troll, hater, or critic for that. You can't sit there and say it's Tevin's fault at that point. You know what I mean? So DSP really needs to put an effort into this, because if not, he's going to get blown out the water. Because there are detractors who are wrestling fans, and they'll be able to break down a lot of his mistakes. You know what I'm saying? And even if PPP exaggerates a point, it'll make sense, because it's just that's what the business is based off of. Another point is PPP bringing up the fact that, it's a carny type business, and it attracts carny type people, and they all tend to be pieces of shit. Looking back at or harkening back to what he was saying about Hogan. And yet again, I think a lot of people forget that, it was a carny type business, right? You know what I'm saying? That's how it was, a cash hand in hand and hand to hand type business. You know what I'm saying? So there's always a bunch of shady type of individuals. And I think putting out that context also only strengthens PPP's positioning, and people in the audience not always, but naturally gravitating to him than to DSP. And because DSP has shut down those type of conversations for so many years, and the fact that when he was willing to have those conversations, they were absolute nothing but fucking nothing burgers. He himself is going to lose priority on his own platform. You know what I'm saying? Whether it's the wrestling podcast or whether it's DSP's own slop. And I think that in itself is going to be the most fascinating thing. Because DSP even admitted, I was hoping this opening show, this debut, you know what I'm saying, of this new show, would go ahead and catch people up who have been out of the loop for a while. That is the most ignorant and retarded thing I've ever heard in my life. How can you expect to catch up on 2 years? Fuck that. 6 months a year, 3 years, 5 years in 3 hours. How does that work? And it's because of that blatant lack of awareness and understanding of what he's going into, what he's already in, I should say, only perpetuates the thought that DSP is going to fail. And it's going to, and the more that he, and even if he does try to take it seriously, he has to try to speed run that shit. And just because he can take in information and maybe even retain it, doesn't mean he can utilize it. So that's where you're going to start seeing a lot of his faults show up. PPP was able to cover most of his holes. Most of the points that DSP made, PPP just ended off with, yeah, okay. Which is the same thing he does to Andy. He does the exact same thing to Andy when Andy makes a really dumb point. Or he makes a nothing comment just so he can have his voice be heard. He always dismisses it in the exact same way. It doesn't come across incredibly offensive, but the statement's made, yeah, buddy, I don't, all right, whatever. And then let's just keep it moving. If Phil doesn't pick up on those type of nuances, he's going to be what he's always meant to be, a stepping stone. You know what I'm saying? And then PPP will be able to go back and farm it for content, and because Kino can see the house always wins, basically. Anywho, those are just some of the things that I wanted to bring up that I saw for the most part. There's probably a few other things too, but I'll be doing a video actually going over full 2 hours or whatever the case may be, 3 hours, whatever it is. Maybe I can have Diggs cut it down a bit, and you know, we'll watch it together and we'll see what's what. And hopefully I can point out some of this to you with a bit more clarity. But I just wanted to get my initial thoughts out there to you. I very much appreciate your time and whatnot. It means a lot and whatnot. And whatnot. Like I said, hopefully you guys had a good lunch on me or whatever the case may be. And you know, take care of yourselves, people. Like I said, I appreciate you giving me some time of yours. Later.